Today's summit is about the future of our economy. It's about the future of Canada. I say future of Canada and our nations because it's about how we can build in all senses, particularly how we can build together, and how we can build an economy that moves from reliance to resilience, from division to unity, from silos to true partnership.
In a moment that could reshape Canada's place in the world, Prime Minister Mark Carney stood before the troops at CFB Trenton and delivered a message as clear as it was historic. The era of reliance is over, and the era of resilience has begun. For decades, Canada's defense and security strategy was built on an unshakable assumption that the United States would always be its ultimate shield. But in a world growing more dangerous, more divided, and far less predictable, Carney signaled a decisive pivot. Canada will stand on its own feet, build new alliances, and invest heavily in the capabilities to protect itself without waiting for permission or protection from Washington. This shift was crystallized in the announcement of the new EU-Canada Security and Defence Partnership, a strategic agreement designed to integrate Canada into Europe's security initiative and the ambitious Rearm Europe plan. The implications are vast. Canadian defense suppliers will help meet Europe's urgent need for weapons, vehicles, and technology, while European partners will in turn bolster Canada's own military resilience. It's a move that expands Canada's strategic circle far beyond its traditional transatlantic comfort zone and sends a message that Ottawa will not be hostage to the political mood swings south of the border. The timing could not be more pointed. Only days earlier, President Donald Trump had slapped a punitive 35% tariff on Canadian goods not covered under USMCA, targeting Canadian steel, aluminum, and critical minerals. For many nations, such an economic blow might have prompted quiet negotiation or concession. Carney chose a different route, turning those very materials into a national security advantage. Under the new strategy, Canadian steel will reinforce Canadian tanks and ships. Canadian aluminum will go into aircraft frames. Canadian critical minerals will fuel advanced defense technologies, and even Canadian lumber will play a role in supporting infrastructure for the armed forces. That determination is backed by money, serious money. Canada will invest over $9 billion this year alone, hitting the NATO spending pledge of 2% of GDP half a decade ahead of schedule. And that's just the start. Carney announced plans to meet NATO's new, far more ambitious defense investment goal, 5% of annual GDP by 2035. To put this in perspective, total Canadian defense and security spending will quadruple by the end of the decade compared to 2023-24 levels. The scale of that expansion marks a generational shift in both policy and ambition. But this transformation isn't only about numbers or alliances. It's a response to the hard realities of a changing world. Carney spoke plainly of the threats Canada faces: an emboldened Russia, a more assertive China, melting Arctic ice opening new contested sea routes, rapid advances in cyber warfare, artificial intelligence and missile technology, and the destabilizing effects of climate change. Gone is the assumption that Canada's geography alone can shield it from global turmoil. The government's diagnosis of the armed forces condition is sobering. Only one of Canada's 4 submarines is seaworthy. Less than half of the maritime fleet and land vehicles are operational. Decades of underinvestment have left infrastructure and equipment aged and inadequate. This is why, alongside the new defense partnership with Europe, Ottawa is creating a new defense procurement agency to rapidly get the right equipment to the military when it's needed, not years after the request is made. Yet Carney's speech was not just about weapons, ships, or budgets. It was also about people, the men and women who wear the maple leaf on their uniforms, and the families who serve alongside them in sacrifice, if not in combat. He acknowledged what Canadians have long known but rarely addressed in policy. While demands on the armed forces have grown, their resources, and especially their salaries, have lagged behind. In a sweeping overhaul, Carney announced a series of pay increases that will transform military compensation. Starting pay for privates will jump by 20%. Lieutenant colonels and below will see a 13% raise, while colonels and above will get 8%. These boosts, retroactive to April 1st of this year, come with additional service-based benefits, fairer posting allowances, and extra support for those preparing for combat or high-risk training. Specialized trades, critical to keeping the military running, will receive targeted incentives to strengthen retention and readiness. It's a recognition that the military is not just an institution, it's a network of families who often endure uprooted lives, long separations, and constant uncertainty. Carney's policy acknowledges that reality, aiming to give those families more stability, more choices, and more security of their own. For the armed forces, this moment is more than a policy announcement. It's a turning point. The message from the Prime Minister was unmistakable. Canada will not drift into the future hoping for protection. It will forge its own path, with allies who value mutual commitment over political convenience. And in doing so, it will rebuild its military strength from the inside out. Whether this bold vision survives the pressures of global politics remains to be seen. But August 2025 may well be remembered as the month Canada took a sharp turn toward military self-reliance, and in the process, began to redefine its role in a turbulent world. If Part 1 of Mark Carney's vision was about strategy and numbers, Part 2 is about the lived reality of those who will carry it out, the Canadian Armed Forces. For years, Canada's soldiers, sailors, and air personnel have been asked to do more with less. Their duties have expanded far beyond traditional defense. In recent summers, they have been called upon not just to patrol borders or deploy overseas, but to fight wildfires, rescue flood victims, and provide humanitarian aid in disaster zones. This summer alone, forces have been deployed in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, and soon Newfoundland and Labrador, evacuating more than 6,000 Canadians from danger. Just this week, members based at CFB Trenton airdropped life-saving aid into Gaza. These operations underscore a point Carney made explicitly. The Canadian forces are as much a first responder to domestic crises as they are a deterrent to foreign threats. But this expanded role has not been matched by the resources or recognition it deserves, until now. In his speech, Carney painted a vivid picture of what service means beyond the uniform. He spoke not only of the risks taken by those in combat, but of the invisible sacrifices made by their families. The spouses who uproot their lives on short notice, the children who leave behind friends and schools, the parents who spend holidays with an empty chair at the table, trusting their loved ones will make it home. For them, a pay raise is more than a financial change. It is a lifeline, a source of stability in a career defined by uncertainty. The compensation overhaul announced at Trenton is comprehensive. On top of the base pay raises, 8% for colonels and above, 13% for lieutenant colonels and below, and 20% for privates, Ottawa will introduce a military service pay benefit tied directly to years served. This is designed to honor longevity in uniform, ensuring that commitment is rewarded over time. For those undertaking the most dangerous assignments, such as high-risk training or combat preparation, there will be new hazard-related pay. And for the trades essential to maintaining the military's operational readiness, additional incentives will be offered to recruit and retain talent. Even the way relocation allowances are calculated will change. Too often, posting allowances have failed to reflect the actual disruption caused by frequent moves. Under the new rules, the more times a member is forced to uproot their life, the higher the compensation, especially if those moves take them far from family support networks. This recognition of the personal toll of service marks a cultural as well as financial shift. It acknowledges that the Canadian Armed Forces is not a faceless institution, but a living, breathing network of people whose resilience depends on the stability of those closest to them. Carney made clear that the goal is not just to retain personnel, but to make service an attractive career for a new generation, capable of meeting Canada's defense needs for decades to come. The Prime Minister also linked these pay and benefit changes directly to Canada's broader defense strategy. A better paid, better supported force is a more ready and reliable one. Higher morale translates into higher retention, which in turn strengthens the country's ability to respond quickly to crises, whether they emerge at home or abroad. But there was another dimension to Carney's message, one aimed squarely at the geopolitical landscape. By tying military modernization to industrial policy, his government is not only strengthening the armed forces but also creating opportunities for Canadian workers. Investments in Canadian-made steel, aluminum, critical minerals, and even lumber, are meant to feed both defense production and domestic jobs. Carney framed this as a win-win, a stronger military and a stronger economy, each reinforcing the other. This is where the EU-Canada partnership becomes even more critical. By participating in Europe's rearmament, Canadian industry gains access to new markets, while Canada gains access to European technologies, procurement networks, and political goodwill. In an era when Washington's economic hostility can arrive overnight, as it did with Trump's recent tariff announcement, this diversification of alliances is not a luxury. It's a necessity. Yet diversifying alliances also comes with risks. Aligning more closely with Europe may complicate Canada's defense relationship with the United States, particularly if U.S. policy turns more inward or protectionist. Carney's gamble is that by building these ties now, Canada will be less vulnerable to future shocks, whether they come in the form of tariffs, diplomatic spats, or divergent military priorities. For the armed forces, the message was clear. Ottawa sees you, values you, and is willing to invest in you. For Canadian industry, the signal was just as clear. Defense is no longer a side note in economic planning, it is a pillar. And for Canada's allies, the speech was an invitation to see Ottawa not as a junior partner under America's wing, but as a fully engaged, fully capable player in global security. Still, questions remain. Can Canada sustain the pace of investment needed to hit 5% of GDP by 2035 without straining its finances? Will the new procurement agency cut through the bureaucratic delays that have long plagued defense projects? And perhaps most importantly, will Canadians themselves embrace this shift toward a more assertive defense posture in an increasingly volatile world? What is undeniable is that this is no small adjustment. It is a reimagining of Canada's role in the world, one that places self-reliance at the center of its defense policy for the first time in generations. For a country that has long preferred the quiet comfort of a strong neighbor's shadow, that is nothing short of a revolution. By the time Carney stepped away from the podium at CFB Trenton, the contours of a new Canadian defense doctrine had come into focus, one that marries industrial self-sufficiency, strategic diversification, and a deep investment in human capital. But as much as the announcements were about the future, they were also an acknowledgement of how the past has left Canada exposed. For decades, Ottawa operated under the comforting, but increasingly unrealistic notion that its geography, a vast Arctic shield, 2 ocean buffers, and the friendly giant to the south, made it inherently secure. That assumption has been eroding for years. Melting Arctic ice is opening navigable waters to foreign vessels, some from rival powers. Advances in cyber, AI, quantum computing, and missile technology are compressing the distance between threat and target. Climate change is bringing not just environmental disruption, but new avenues for security breaches, from resource disputes to mass migrations triggered by disasters. Carney's speech made it clear, waiting for others to act is no longer an option. The world Canada faces today is marked by great power competition, contested borders, and the steady erosion of the post-Second World War international order. Russia's emboldened aggression and China's assertive reach are not abstract geopolitical trends. They are active forces reshaping the rules of engagement. In such a climate, dependence is a liability. The choice to align more closely with Europe through the EU-Canada security and defense partnership is, at its core, a bet on shared values and mutual strategic needs. Europe is rearming at a pace not seen in decades, spurred by the war in Ukraine and a growing awareness that U.S. commitment to transatlantic defense can no longer be taken for granted. For Canada, joining that effort offers more than access to markets. It offers a seat at the table where the next generation of defense norms and technologies will be shaped. The partnership also serves a pragmatic purpose. By channeling Canadian-made materials into Europe's rearmament, Ottawa creates a steady demand for its industrial outputs even as U.S. tariffs threaten key exports. The same steel, aluminum, and critical minerals that face barriers entering the American market can now be sold into European supply chains, and in many cases, brought back home in the form of advanced defense systems. It is a neat inversion of the trade dynamic. What once would have been a vulnerability is turned into a strategic advantage. Domestically, the implications of this shift are profound. Defense spending on the scale Carney envisions will ripple through the Canadian economy, from manufacturing hubs in Ontario and Quebec to resource extraction in the prairies and the north. It will require a trained workforce, new infrastructure, and long-term procurement planning, areas where Canada has historically lagged. The establishment of a dedicated defense procurement agency is intended to address that gap, speeding up timelines and ensuring that military needs are met without years of bureaucratic delay. But alongside the hardware and the industrial contracts, Carney emphasized something less tangible but no less critical: the morale and cohesion of the armed forces. His speech was threaded with recognition, not just of the soldiers themselves, but of the families who live with the consequences of military life. He spoke of the small sacrifices that accumulate into a lifetime of service: missed birthdays, broken school years, holiday tables missing a loved one. By tying pay increases and allowances to the realities of relocation, deployment, and risk, the government is signaling that it understands the human dimension of readiness. This approach may prove as important as any procurement plan. Modern militaries face a constant challenge of recruitment and retention, and Canada is no exception. A force that feels undervalued is a force that bleeds talent. Conversely, one that feels respected and supported will not only retain its members but attract new ones. If Ottawa can match improved pay with a renewed sense of purpose, the Canadian Armed Forces could enter the next decade stronger than it has been in a generation. Still, this transformation will not unfold in a vacuum. Every dollar spent on defense is a dollar that competes with other national priorities, from healthcare to climate resilience to infrastructure. And while Carney has made the case that a secure Canada is the foundation for all other ambitions, he will need to persuade a public that has, until recently, been largely insulated from global instability. The political test will come when the costs, financial and otherwise, become more visible. Internationally, the shift toward European partnerships may also provoke reactions. Washington is unlikely to see Canada's diversification as a betrayal, but it may interpret it as a hedge against U.S. unpredictability, an interpretation that, in truth, is not far from the mark. At the same time, deepening ties with Europe will require sustained diplomatic effort, especially as EU members pursue their own diverse and sometimes conflicting defense priorities. For now, the symbolism of the moment is hard to miss. In just a few days, Canada went from being on the receiving end of a sharp U.S. trade penalty to announcing one of the largest defense spending increases in its modern history, all while forging new alliances designed to reduce dependence on that same U.S. market. The message to allies and adversaries alike is clear: Canada is preparing to stand on its own terms. Whether this is the start of a lasting strategic realignment or a bold but temporary response to an unpredictable moment will depend on follow-through. Defense transformations are measured not in speeches but in ships built, contracts fulfilled, units trained, and missions completed. But August 2025 will stand as the month Canada declared that reliance was no longer enough, and resilience was the only way forward. In the weeks and months ahead, as procurement plans are fleshed out, alliances deepened, and the first wave of pay raises hit KF paychecks, Canadians will begin to see whether this new doctrine can deliver on its promises. If it does, it could mark the birth of a more assertive, more capable, and more independent Canada, one ready to meet the turbulence of the 21st century not with deference but with determination.